Ever tried to like return something you just, forgot the receipt? It's a bane, right?
The worst.
Well, imagine like a whole country where important contracts, the kind that actually like build the roads, hospitals, schools, those contracts get handed out based on like who, not, like what, your qualifications.
Yeah, yeah.
Kenya, unfortunately. And today we're going on a deep dive, kind of looking at a research paper that tries to unpack this whole procurement puzzle, I guess you could call it. Really shines a light on corruption and how it's become like a major roadblock to progress.
Yeah, and it's not just like a few bad apples here and there. This paper, they titled it Approaching Transcendence, a conceptual discussion on procurement fraud, education, professionalism, maturity, ethics, and implications. It's from the Journal of Public Procurement, and they're really arguing that something is like fundamentally broken in the system. It's not just a couple people.
Okay, so paint me a picture, How bad is it? Like, really?
So get this, a ridiculous 70% of corruption cases in Kenya are directly linked to how the government awards contracts.
Wow.
Think about that for a second. That's 7 out of 10 times something shady's going on.
Yeah.
And this research paper, what they do is they go into like the nitty-gritty of how this happens, even introducing us to this interesting character, the tenderpreneur.
Tenderpreneur, that's a new one.
It's kind of creative, I guess. Yeah.
Maybe not so ethical.
Okay.
These are entrepreneurs who thrive on exploiting the system, and they do this by using connections, often shady ones, to get those government contracts, usually by, offering these crazy inflated prices.
Right.
They know how to work the angles, play the game, and profit from it.
So less about like offering the best service and more about like who you can,
Yes.
a little something to.
Exactly. And you know what? This paper, it doesn't shy away from real-world examples. They talk about the Anglo leasing scandal.
Okay.
So picture this. We've got a non-existent UK company.
Oh, wow.
It's a ghost company, like literally. And they get awarded a $35 million contract to produce tamper-proof passports for Kenya.
Wow. Okay, but like how is that even possible? Shouldn't there be like checks and balances, people checking up on this stuff? That's what's so fascinating. This paper, it suggests that these scandals aren't just like isolated incidents, but they're symptoms of a deeper problem.
Okay.
And they even point to concepts like the principal agent problem. Have you heard of that?
Okay. I have to admit that sometimes I get a little lost. Could you break that down for me and, for our listener?
Yeah, for sure. So think of it this way. The Kenyan citizens are like the principals, okay?
Wow.
They're entrusting the government, their agents, to act in their best interest.
Okay.
Use their tax money wisely.
Right.
But sometimes those agents, in this case, the government officials, prioritize their own personal gain. And that misalignment, that's the principal agent problem.
So in this case, the agent goes rogue and the principal, the everyday Kenyan, is left holding the bag. It's like finding out that your contractor used like the cheap stuff, but charged you for the good stuff, but like on a national scale.
Exactly. And the paper digs into other theories as well, like game theory, but that takeaway is clear. It's not about a few bad people. It's about a system that's like designed to be exploited.
Okay, so if the system itself is the problem, where do you even begin to fix it?
That's the million-dollar question. And luckily for us, this paper offers some potential answers. One thing they really focus on is education.
Okay.
But it's not as straightforward as you might think. It's not just about teaching ethics.
Okay, so it's not as simple as just like adding like an ethics course to the curriculum. What's the missing piece then when it comes to education in this case?
It's about recognizing that there are systemic issues that lead to this lack of what we call procurement maturity.
Procurement maturity.
Think about it. How we value a profession has a huge impact on, who it attracts.
Absolutely. A high-paying, well-respected career path, that's going to attract a very different crowd than a dead-end job.
Mm-hmm.
But what does that have to do with procurement in Kenya? So are you saying that like procurement just isn't seen as this like, desirable career path in Kenya?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. The paper highlights that a lot of times people just see it as like an admin role pushing paper around rather than, like actual strategic decision making.
So you've got this system that's like just, primed for being exploited. And you're not exactly attracting, the best and brightest. What a mess. But surely there are people out there that, want to do things the right way, right?
Of course, there are good people everywhere. But this paper argues that even with the best intentions, a lot of graduates just aren't ready for how complex the job really is.
Okay.
They come out of school with all this theory, but then they get to the real world and they're lacking those, like, practical skills.
So it's like sending someone to, like, one of those cooking competitions when all they've ever done is read cookbooks. They've never actually, like, baked a cake before.
Perfect analogy. And it's a real problem. The paper even cites the statistic 66% of Kenyan college graduates are considered not work ready.
Wow.
Which is a huge red flag, especially in a field like procurement, where even small decisions can have these massive financial consequences,
66%? That's wild.
Yeah.
So even if they, like, aced all their exams, they're kind of thrown into the deep end.
Yeah, no life jacket.
Yeah, exactly.
And without the right skills and support, it's so easy to get caught up in that web of corruption,
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It's kind of disheartening. So, like, where do we go from here? Is there any, like, light at the end of this tunnel?
Don't despair yet. Remember that word transcendence from the title of the paper?
Right.
Well, this is where it kicks in. The authors, they propose this, I guess you'd call it a radical solution, but honestly, I think it's got real potential.
Okay, you've got my attention.
Yeah.
Tell me more about this transcendence idea.
So basically, they're saying we've got to stop with these Band-Aid solutions and really tackle the problem head on, a complete system-wide change.
Yeah.
Universities, professional organizations, industry leaders, even everyday people.
Wow. So not just, like, trying to tweak the system a little bit here and there, but, like, really hitting the reset button. That's ambitious. I mean, where do you even begin with something like that?
Well, they say education is a good starting point,
Right.
but it's not about just throwing in a few extra ethics classes, right? We're talking about, like, a fundamental shift in how we teach and how we even view procurement.
Okay, I'm all ears. How do you go about, like, changing the perception of an entire profession?
It's a multi-pronged approach, right? So first, they suggest we completely revamp the curriculum.
Okay.
Focus on practical skills, not just theory. Like, imagine internships built right into degree programs, simulations of real-life procurement scenarios, mentorship from, people who've been there, done that.
So less about memorizing textbooks and more about getting that, like, real-world experience. I can see how that would be super valuable.
Exactly, but it's bigger than just skills, right?
Okay.
The paper also talks about building up a sense of, like, professional identity.
Okay.
We want people to be proud to work in procurement, to understand the impact they can have in creating a more transparent system.
That makes a lot of sense. If you're constantly hearing that your job is just a formality, like a rubber stamp,
Yeah.
you're not as likely to, rock the boat when you see something that's not right.
Exactly.
But if you believe in the value of what you do,
Right.
you're more likely to, actually act with integrity.
100%. And this is where professional organizations come in.
Okay, so we're talking about, like, groups that, like, advocate for these ethical standards and, like, support professionals who are, under pressure to maybe, like, look the other way or so.
Yeah. A network for ethical conduct, providing training, mentorship, certifications,
Right.
things like that.
Yeah, so it's less about, like, policing people and more about, like, actually creating this community and this culture that, like, really values ethical behavior.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. But even with all those changes, you're still going to have people who are, tempted by corruption. How do you deal with that?
That's where this paper gets super interesting. Instead of just focusing on, like, punishment after the fact, they say we should be focusing more on prevention.
Okay, now you're talking. So how do you actually go about, like, building a system that's less vulnerable to corruption in the first place?
Transparency is key. Imagine, like, open data initiatives where you can see all the government contracts,
Oh, wow.
the procurement processes, everything's just out in the open.
So shining a light on how these decisions are made, who gets awarded these contracts and why, who they know, all that.
Right, exactly. And it's not just about making that information public, it's about empowering people to hold their leaders accountable.
So encouraging people to, speak up, report suspicious activity, demand better.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that idea. But, that can be risky, right? Especially in contexts where speaking truth to power, it can have serious consequences.
Yeah.
So how do you create that safe space for people to actually, come forward?
That's huge. The paper really emphasizes the need for strong whistleblower protection laws,
Right.
and ways to report things anonymously, things like that. It's about creating that culture where people feel safe speaking out against corruption.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. We've talked about the importance of education, professional development, transparency, accountability, all of it. And it seems like this transcendence model that they're talking about, it's really about creating a system that's just like way more resistant to corruption from the ground up, right?
Yeah.
It's like they're saying you can't just like slap a Band-Aid on the symptoms of corruption. You got to go after the root cause.
Yeah, you got to pull it up from the source. And that's what makes this whole transcendence model so interesting, but also probably like a real uphill battle to put into practice. It means changing how people think, how they act, even how institutions work.
So no small feat. But let's bring this back to, our listener for a second. We've been like really digging deep into how this all plays out in Kenya. But I'm sure some people are thinking, okay, this is all very interesting, but like, what does it have to do with me?
It's a fair question, but the truth is, corruption isn't just a Kenya thing. It's everywhere, all over the world, even if it looks a little different depending on where you are.
That's true. I mean, we all deal with bureaucracy, right? We deal with inefficiency, lack of transparency, all that, whether it's trying to figure out like a permit process, or maybe you got a shady contractor, or even just wondering like, hey, where's my tax money actually going?
Exactly. And this whole idea of procurement maturity, this idea that people have to see a job as valuable and respectable, to want to do it well, to do it ethically, that's something that matters in every industry, in every field.
Yeah. It makes you wonder how often we just accept like a bad service, or maybe we get overcharged for something and we just kind of shrug and say, well, that's just how it is.
Right. Like we don't even stop to think, wait a minute, is there something shady going on here?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's about building up that instinct to question things, Don't be afraid to ask the tough questions. Demand some transparency from the people in charge. Because corruption, it's not a victimless crime. It breaks down trust, it holds back progress, and ultimately it hurts all of us.
100%. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you really hope our listeners take away from all of this?
I think this paper gives us a real message of hope. It shows that even when corruption feels totally overwhelming, like it's always been there and always will be, real change is still possible. But it's got to be a group effort, right? It takes everyday people, communities, institutions all saying enough is enough. We deserve better than this.
I love that. It's a call to action. It's about being engaged citizens, asking those tough questions, and supporting anything that promotes transparency and accountability.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And it starts by understanding the problem. When we can see the root causes of corruption, the things that allow it to grow, then we can start creating a world where it's not about who you know, but what you know and what you stand for.
Well said. This has been a fascinating deep dive, a little bit, heavy at times, but ultimately really inspiring. It's got me thinking about how we can all do our part to build a better, more just world, one where things are a little fairer for everyone.
Absolutely.
So to everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you some new things to think about, maybe challenge some old assumptions, and hopefully even inspired you to get a little more involved in your own community. Until next time, keep asking those tough questions, and most importantly, keep on diving deep.